I call the member for Hughes.
On behalf of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Law Enforcement, I present the committee's report, incorporating a dissenting report on an inquiry into human trafficking, slavery and slavery-like practices, and ask leave of the House to make a short statement in connection with the report.
Is leave granted?
Leave is granted.
Thank you. The member for Hughes.
I move that the House take note of the report. And, Deputy Speaker, a few comments that... Speaker, my humblest apologies. I'd like to make a few comments on the committee. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate all committee members from both sides of the House and also from the independents, the crossbenchers, on the way that we've all worked together cooperatively and a way to try and get the best report out for the country rather than taking political partisanship in this report. A couple of things I would note, Speaker. We have a few areas that where we talk about modern slavery that you could divide into three separate areas. One is forced labour, the second would be sexual servitude, and the third would be forced marriage. On the issue of forced labour, you could break that down to two sections. One is the migrant workers that we have coming into our country. There were some quite disturbing reports of mistreatment of migrant workers, simply because a lot of these workers weren't actually informed of their rights. And I believe that this is a problem that can be addressed if we can give access to those migrant workers when they come to Australia, informing them of actually what their rights are, what their employment rights are. Otherwise, I think we have the law enforcement facilities in place, we have the regulatory facilities in place. We just need to work on perhaps the informational remedies to make sure that those people coming into the country know fully of their rights, so they're not at risk of exploitation. On the issue of sexual servitude, the committee didn't find a great deal of problems in this area. There are a few minor reports, but that didn't seem to be something that needed a great more regulatory reach. On the issue of forced marriage, this was an issue that was of a particular concern to myself and also other members of the committee. And we did find that there is the evidence is this is a growing problem in our societies. And again, it comes back to, I think the best way to tackle this is through information rather than actually further legislation. We've made the legislation is there, the enforcement procedures are there. I think it gets back to making sure that we inform Australians of exactly what the law is. And one area that I think that we could actually improve is particularly with when new migrants come to this country. Because the reality is that migrants from some parts of the world, the idea of what we say is an underage marriage in Australia is something that is custom in those countries. And I'm sure, though, without defending the people that have been engaged in underage marriages, I'm sure that they actually didn't realise that they were actually doing something that was wrong and in breach of Australian law. If this is something that's been common throughout their culture, and it may have been their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents, where sort of underage marriage was the way things were done back in their homeland country, when they come to Australia, unless they are specifically informed that the laws here we have in Australia are substantially different to what the laws may be in their home country or the customs may be in part of their home country, this problem is something that is likely to continue. And therefore the recommendations we have made in respect to that are for greater education of migrants that come to the country, that they are aware of Australia's laws as far as underage and forced marriages. On the issue of the Modern Slavery Act in the UK has been brought to us on this. We looked at this closely. The concern was that a lot of steps in that create a great deal of regulatory and red tape burdens for business, and it's not clear that it actually has any practical effect. One of the concerns we particularly had was the way it was require businesses to basically almost certify that their supply chain was free of slavery-like practices. Now, Speaker, I can tell from my own experiences in sourcing components and products throughout Southeast Asia, that is very difficult when you go to a certain place. You have subcontractors subcontracting to subcontractors, subcontracting to other subcontractors. And it's very difficult for any small or medium-sized business when they are dealing with an overseas supplier. They may be able to guarantee that supplier, but to go back through that supplier's production chain all the way back to the raw materials is virtually impossible. It may be very possible for some very, very large companies to do this, but for small and medium-sized businesses, I don't think it's practical, and I think the costs of doing it are actually likely to be counterproductive. Because most things that businesses want from an overseas supplier, they want a supplier that can supply them with goods of a high quality and deliver them on time. And any business or supply chain that is relying on slavery-like practices will simply not be able to deliver that.